Welcome to the Gravity Well, where you break down heavy ideas into small buckets you can handle. Your mission is simple: help us work through your dilemmas in conversation and process. Together, you and your community will face your dilemmas and make the world a better place for all. In the spirit of truth, I acknowledge I'm a settler on stolen Blackfoot Treaty 7 territory and Métis Districts 5 and 6 lands. I take reconciliation by seeking the wisdom of elders and individuals who aim to restore water, air, land, life, or community. A healthy living relationship with the earth and each other is our guide. I'm thrilled to have a couple guests here that have been leading the rallies for Palestine in Calgary. Please introduce yourself and your organization and a little bit about your background. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Wesam Khalid. In my activist work, I've gone by the name Wesam Khalid. I'm a member of Justice for Palestinians Calgary, which is a group that was formed in 2009 here, a community-based activist group to support the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the Israeli apartheid government and to support the Palestinian liberation struggle as a whole. Personally, I've been involved in Palestine activism for about 15 years since my undergrad days. I know Walaa from way back as well. Yeah, I mean, it's, being an activist around Palestine for that long, you witness a lot of horrors, but I have to say it's been, these last 8 or 9 months have been just the most horrifying, I think, that we've seen certainly in my lifetime. So yeah, we've been quite active over the recent period, especially.
Yeah, it's incredible. And yeah, just while I'm thinking of it, the amount of energy it must take to do this every week, especially like you said, with how hard the information is to take in, it's tremendous. So I'm really grateful to you both. Wala, please take the time and introduce yourself as well, please.
Thanks for having me. My name is Walaa Katoue. Like Wissam said, we go way back to our bright-eyed and bushy-tailed university days. We thought the world was our oyster and we could conquer it all. It's rather strange to be cognizant of how much time has passed since those days and how entrenched this all still is. My background is in psychology, and I have been advocating for Palestine for as long as I know. I'm not Palestinian myself, but my children are, and so I did it before them for the Palestinians, and now I do it with that extra little bit of I want them to know their home and their heritage and their land. Right now, this year, or the past year since October, we co-founded the Watermelon Foundation for Justice. It's a organization in Calgary, but we do have members from coast to coast. And it's just about advocating for Palestine, advocating for the rights of Palestinians here and abroad, promoting their culture, the language, everything that is Palestine, that is they're trying to erase. We want to keep it and make it known. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, incredible. Wow, thank you so much. I haven't heard your story before, so that is wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to offer a little bit about how I came to you guys, just to help frame my background for you and for others. So, I was in the oil and gas industry, and I was a geophysicist, so I worked on the front end of the business, and created a bunch of opportunities, as you will. And the way the industry is set up is you hand those off. Well, you have a group of people that are part of development, but asset retirement is separate, and you don't look at it. It's always been separate. And so during COVID, I got offered this opportunity to look at it very closely, and I had already been connected to this because I was at a startup company when oil prices came out and started to think about this mess that we were leaving for the future and how it was becoming bigger in my mind. So I was following it, got this opportunity, and started to realize how many problems we were creating that I wasn't fully aware of what I was contributing to. And so I took a course, and it helped me. It asked me to define the problem. And so I realized that it wasn't just an industry problem. It included the regulator and it included the government. And oh my goodness, it includes stakeholders. That means this includes everybody. Holy smokes. And so then I started to realize that this isn't just an energy transition. This is a social transition. Like, this is wow. And so for me, that's 2022 when I came into like full understanding. At the time, I was one of my coworkers, so it was a person that I had known for quite some time. Like he actually went to school with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the looming or impending Ukrainian war. And like I'm of Ukrainian background, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, it's going to happen. It's going to happen." And I said, "Yeah, I hope not." And the answer was, "Well, it will help oil prices." And I think at the time, like when I heard it, it's something that we've said. Like I'll be honest with you, it's something that I heard a lot in industry. Like this conflict, it's gonna help. We're safe. Our jobs are safe. And and then it really sunk in for me because I'm of Ukrainian background, right? So it was one of those moments where I couldn't just, yeah, whatever. It was what, we can't be wishing for this. And so then when, the war started and people started saying, "How come this is okay in or not okay in Ukraine, but it's okay in the Middle East?" And it was like, "Oh, man." So this is sort of how I came into understanding of. And so now when this war broke out, right away, it was to me a David and Goliath situation, same thing as Ukraine. This isn't a an army that Israel, boasts about having. This is, an innocent group of people that is trying to resist something atrocious. So again, I'm speaking from a place of ignorance. I hope you hear that. Like, I'm doing my best to understand, and yeah. So I'm really grateful. And so how I got to your rallies, I know Ronnie. So Ronnie from Independent Jewish Voices. Yeah. So I met her at a climate rally just leading up to that. And so when she was saying she was attending this, I felt safe that I knew somebody that also understood this in the same way I did, especially of Jewish background. It really helped me understand that this isn't a racist thing that we're told that this has to do with. So I think that's enough from me. I would like to sort of answer some of these questions. So I've sort of done a segment for us where we can talk about these statements that are made, and these are in no particular order. But so with some of the things, I'll start with the first one. So when people say something like, "This is a 6,000-year-old story,"
This isn't some ancient thing, ancient hatred of peoples or anything like that. I do think it gets painted in that way by people who want to push a certain narrative around what's happening in Palestine. But I'll tell you the way that Palestinians look at it, and I think for most of us who stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, this is roughly a 75-year-old conflict. This goes back to basically the settler colonial project that imperial countries, predominantly Britain, imposed upon Palestine. There's a lot of history there that isn't really this ancient race hatred thing. It's actually not between Arabs and Jews, at least. I would say there is more of an old race hatred that plays into this story, which is European anti-Semitism and European hatred against Jews. And much of the Zionist movement, which is, Zionism is basically that ideology, political program of trying to establish a Jewish majority state in the land of Palestine. That largely emerges, that's a European phenomenon, actually. It emerges as a response to European anti Semitism and racism against Jews, which was extreme for hundreds of years. That is an actual ancient race hatred that plays in here. But also, Zionism adopted many of the assumptions of colonial ideology and came to the conclusion that it was okay to displace the Palestinian people in order to establish that Jewish majority state. Because, of course, how else do you establish a Jewish majority state in a land that's already occupied predominantly by non-Jews, indigenous Palestinians? There's only one way, really, and that's to displace them. And frankly, that issue that comes with trying to displace Palestinians and maintain this settler colonial racist state that benefits its Jewish citizens to the detriment of its indigenous Palestinians, that is actually the heart of the entire Israeli-Palestinian issue, in my view. And the Palestinians' resistance to it as well. It's a thorn in the side of Zionism and their refusal to lay down and die or to leave and forget about their rights to their land. That's really more what this is about. It's a very modern conflict, actually, rooted in these ancient racist hatreds of Zionism's sort of historical trauma of European anti-Semitism, coupled with European colonial mentalities that see Arabs and basically everyone who's not European as like disposable and basically less than human.
Yeah, this it's hard not to see it that way when, an example I've heard you use recently in the rallies is the story of the beheaded child on October 7th or 6th. I apologize. And that it was a unbelievable outrage for the world, the media and everything. And yet we've witnessed in the last month an actual image of a Palestinian child, and it was like it barely hit the news. So yeah, that difference is pretty shocking. And thank you very much. Did you have anything to add, Willa?
Wissam hit the nail on the head with the conflict being about a century old. I'd say that is it Rashid Khalili, The 100-Year War in Palestine? Amazing book on the history. If someone's looking for just like a cover to cover, step by step of how this happened. But I think all of it is just smoke screens, smoke and mirrors, that it's, ancient and it predates, and it's, what do they call it? The intractable conflict of the Middle East. There's no solution. No one's ever going to solve it. In reality, it is actually extremely simple once you pare it down to the bare bones of it. It's colonialism and imperialism. This is what is the fire that fuels what's happening in Palestine. And you mentioned about the beheaded babies. I will never forget when the war in Ukraine happened. If you guys remember that news reporter who said, these are not people in the Middle East and Africa. They're people like us. And it always like circles my mind that there is that very clear distinction in people's minds that these are the areas of the world where conflict happens, and these are the areas where there's safety and peace and prosperity. I always question, like, okay, well, who said that? Who decided that they have the authority to say that this is the status quo, when in reality they're creating these conflicts to benefit themselves?
Yeah, thank you. That's I could not agree more. My point of view from the oil and gas industry is this thought that everything's at arm's length again. So if it's happening in Africa, well, that's their government deciding how their people are being treated in this effort. And there's no thought about the fact that we're imposing something on this, right? And that it's actually, yeah, leaders are making bad decisions, but again, that's not for the benefit of the people. And what I find fascinating as somebody who understands the liability here in this province, there is no other jurisdiction in the world that has as many holes in the ground and as much damage to the environment as Alberta. There is 400,000 hectares of between oil sands and well sites and facility sites in this province. I think Texas would be the next matching thing. They have 300,000 holes in the ground, not 500,000. And we look past that and we criticize what's happening on the other half of the world. And what our government and industry and regulator tell people is that we have the best environmental regulations in the world. And we can't take oil from the Middle East. They don't treat women well. It's this, and yet here our rights are being stripped. It's happening in the States. It's happening right around us. So to your point, this ability to at some point be able to say that's what's happening there and not what's happening here, that's gone away. It's happening all over. And like you said, you can see it's from this structure we live in, which is this colonialism and the 99.1% structure that we all have to overcome, which is how I understand that what happens in Palestine could happen to my kids. And like you said, somebody can get on a screen and say, that's happening in Ukraine. That's not happening here in Canada, whatever that can be. So how about the comments around protesters are anti-Semitic, protesters are pro-Hamas? For myself, I can say I've been there, I don't know, at least a dozen times, and I've never heard any anti-Semitism being said. I feel in community when I'm there. I feel that it's just a very supportive, understanding group that understands this is a movement of peace. So I feel uplifted in some weird way when I attend these things because it's horrifying, but also anyway. So I'll stop there. What would you say to those comments around anti-Semitism and pro-Hamas? I feel like you've already answered this a bit, but I think there's more on this if you don't mind.
This one's eerily similar to the idea that this conflict is ancient and religious based. It's false. It's set there in place to kind of cloud what is actually happening. And we can see this in the rhetoric, for example, that surrounds the campus protests in the States. It's freedom of speech versus anti-Semitism, completely like ignoring the fact that what's underneath it is no, actually, like these universities are heavily invested and complicit in arming a country that's committing crimes against humanity. I personally believe that's such a huge injustice. I know when Beau comes on, him and I have talked about this, about anti-Semitism is real, but the working definition is it's oppressive for everybody. It's oppressive when it's being used to silence people's rights and their voices, and it's oppressive to people who are facing anti-Semitism. And the reality of that, when it's being used as a cover to shield a country, to shield Israel from criticism, right? Jonathan Greenblatt, is that his name? The ADL spokesperson is like the prime example of weaponizing anti-Semitism for his own good and for the good of Israel. If you remove all of that, I'm glad you say that about the rallies, because that's how I feel. I feel like in all of this chaos and destruction and grief, there is this sense of like people coming together for what's right, for what's humane and decent and good. And in an environment like that, there's no room for any sort of hatred or discrimination against anyone. Because the second we start to do that, we play that game, we're reinforcing the systems that are oppressing us. The same system that looks at me as a Muslim woman or an Arab is the same system that looks at people for being Jewish and stereotypes and is bigoted. So I wish we could work to reclaim that, to reclaim, these ideas back, that this is not anti-Semitic to speak about rights and justice, and it's really unjust to suggest otherwise.
Beautifully said. And I see Beau is in the wings here. So I'm going to bring him in, and then Wesam, once I do, if you wouldn't mind adding on to that, and then we can catch him up. So hi, Beau. Welcome to the room. We are live. Really appreciate you joining us. We were in the middle of answering a question around the comments of these protests being anti-Semitic or that this is pro-Hamas. Walaa just offered some great thoughts, which is, it's a group that is in solidarity, standing up for what is right. And there's no room for hate in any of that. It is all about understanding that this is oppression.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. I really appreciate you joining. So sorry, actually, before he goes in, if you don't mind just offering, telling everyone you're from, Independent Jewish Voices, correct?
Yeah, I work with Independent Jewish Voices as well as Queer Citizens United. And I volunteer with Justice for Palestinians. I'm the sound guy every week. So I know these folks very well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I've had the opportunity to see you many times now. So yeah, thanks. Okay, Wesam, if you wouldn't mind going, and then we'll let Beau catch up on what we're at. Thanks.
Sure, I'll keep it brief because I'm sure Beau has a lot more to say about this than I do. But I will just say on the point about the sort of characterization of protests as anti-Semitic. I think if you use a definition of anti-Semitism which says any criticism of Israel or any questioning of even the Zionist project, any questioning of the settler colonial system that exists in Palestine, if your definition of anti-Semitism is that kind of criticism is anti-Semitic, then you're going to find lots of examples of that, especially at this moment where people are protesting all around the world, criticizing Israel very heavily, saying that these genocidal acts we're seeing are not not just acts of, violence in the moment, but are actually a reflection of the intrinsically racist character of this settler colonial state. If those kinds of criticisms are being defined as anti-Semitic, then people will find lots of examples of that. That's a definition that I would contest. And I think this comes back to sort of what we were talking about earlier. This ancient race hatred. I think this is a reflection of the fact that a lot of people, and particularly Israel supporters, want really want to cast Palestinians as inherently anti-Semitic. That is the source of conflict here, is that Palestinians are just absolutely deranged Jew haters, and that narrative is extremely prevalent across certainly the Western media, and it's completely out of touch with the reality of what Palestinians are, and it feels a bit gross to even have to say this, to have to be like, actually, Palestinians are normal human beings and not barbarians. But this is the level of discourse right now that you actually have to come out and say this. Palestinians, when you speak to them, they are all extremely proud of the history that they had before Zionism came. They will say Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together in peace in Palestine, and for hundreds of years before the coming of Zionism. And that's something that was lost by this settler colonial state being imposed on that land. And that's really important because when people will go and argue things like the attacks on October 7th and other attacks that we see from Palestinians in Israel, they'll say, well, this is just because Palestinians are bloodthirsty anti-Semites. They just really like killing Jews, and that's why they do this, as opposed to seeing this as part of a series of, part of a long history of oppression that the Palestinian people have endured, whether you agree with the tactics or not, right? There's a big discussion to be had about what forms of resistance you use, whether violence is appropriate, whether you target civilians in that violence, although that debate should also be applied equally to Israel. It never seems to be. At a time when Israel has murdered 35,000 Palestinians, the Western media still treats it as if October 7th dwarfs that crime, when it's literally like 30 times less people were killed. All right, if you want to apply that discussion, then you have to apply it equally. But the fact of the matter is, they're human beings on both sides, right? Palestinians are not bloodthirsty anti-Semites, nor do I argue that, I wouldn't say that Israelis are sort of bloodthirsty anti-humans either. Say the issue comes from this ideology of Zionism and settler colonialism. And just like in this country, where good, people who loved their families and who had their own dreams and aspirations and found themselves here in a land that was inhabited by indigenous people and wiped them out as part of a racist ideology, I'd say, well, yeah, human beings are capable of that. And that's really what Israelis are doing. And Palestinians are fighting for a future where they can return to that sort of peace between everyone who was living there that persisted before.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that, folks who are vehemently in support of Israel um, deny or perhaps ignore the fact that many of Israel's supporters, especially in the United States, are evangelical Christians. And as Jewish folks should know and ought to know, Christians are the ones who actually originated anti Semitism, right? In fact, evangelical Christians and such, like the Heritage Foundation in the United States, who make pro-Israel bills possible in the United States in many, many, many cases, right? Outside the Israel lobby, you have the Heritage Foundation and many other evangelical groups advocating in support of Israel for reasons that are inherently anti-Semitic. And you never, ever hear Israeli officials talking about that, right? The evangelical belief is such that in order for the second coming of Christ to come, in their belief, okay, in their faith, is that all the Jews must reside in Israel. 2/3 of them shall be eliminated. The nicest way I'll say it, and the other third will convert to Christianity and amend for their sin of believing in anything other than Christ. Right? It started with the Christ killer myth, right, where Jews were blamed for the killing of Christ, and we all know that's just simply not true. When we look at science versus actual history versus biblical history, it's completely incoherent, right? And what you hear is, again, as it relates to Palestinians, is that they're this inherently violent, inherently anti-Semitic group of people, which is simply not true. You can't characterize a whole group of people as being anti-Semitic. It's just the same as characterizing, for example, right, all white people as being inherently racist. Some of the folks that I know that are willing to, put their life on the line and actually go through like litigative processes as it relates to anti-racist work, where a lot of folks are just not simply unable to do so, right? They use their privilege in such a way as to negate racism. I do believe, and I've worked with many Palestinian people who are not anti-Semitic. They'll attend Shabbat. They'll attend, Yom Kippur service. And they love it. They really enjoy taking in the culture of other people. So simply cannot believe that a blanket statement such as that would apply to all Palestinians or all Muslims or all Arabs or all of any people. Like, race essentialism and essentialism in general is simply to serve a propagandistic purpose, right? I don't believe that all Christians are anti-Semitic. I do believe evangelical Christians are anti-Semitic because their beliefs are anti-Semitic, right? And similarly, when Zionists, for example, and I don't want to paint all Zionists with this brush, right? Within the Jewish community, a lot of people are really attached to the identity of Zionism. They're attached to the inclination that Jews need a safe space. And as a queer person, who has heard many, many times, even in my own circles, like, oh, what if we just got our own island, like away from all the straight people or this and that and the other, and we wouldn't have to face homophobia, wouldn't have to face this or that. We wouldn't have to face housing discrimination, employment discrimination, and so on, right? And Jews have faced those things, right? In Canada until 1956, okay, when Jews were like first allowed back into Turtle Island, right? There were no dogs, no Jews signs in public parks, right? Like, we were still facing anti-Semitism in Canada, right, in the United States, and so on and so forth. Some of the first boats of refugees coming from Germany were denied. They were denied. They were sent back, and most of them were killed. So if we're going to talk about reparations for the Jewish people, well, honestly, in the case of queer people and in the case of Jewish people, I feel the same way, right? We don't need a piece of land to be safe. We need to be able to commune with others to be safe. And if we can't commune with others to be safe, then the world has failed us fundamentally.
Yeah, beautifully said, Beau. Yeah, 100%. Like the other thing that I feel we should talk about, the occupation itself. Like this is a group of people, and now I'm getting into my ignorance here, so I'm going to just tee up what I'm asking and you guys can speak about it. But from what I understand, this is a fenced off area, the largest open air prison in the world. What else can I say? And this is there's gatekeepers. There is, if you leave, you have to go through a gate, and somebody can deny you entry, and you have to go around. Am I wrong in this, or can I have some others offer? What does occupation look like? Can people understand this? And I appreciate that this is happening present here in Canada today, with, in my view, oil and gas development. That's how it plays out here, is at most, although it's happened with agriculture. The Blood Tribe has like a fraction of what they actually can farm, but it's development here mostly in indigenous areas that are critical habitats, and this is why they've been fighting. And so it all sort of comes around for me now. But can you please speak about the occupation, what it looks like, so people understand why there would potentially be some anger towards Israel and what is happening to the Palestinian people?
I don't think people fully they comprehend what exactly the largest open air prison means. And even in the West Bank, trying to understand that these, when you speak to people who come from Gaza or people who live in the West Bank, like my sister-in-law, it is a very, very different reality there. The rhetoric is sometimes that, Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005 and, left all these beautiful greenhouses for people to cultivate the land, and they could have made it into the next Hawaii or, some exotic resort. The reality is, you're absolutely right. There are concrete walls that run, I think, if I'm not mistaken, like 6 to 12 feet underground, that are topped with barbed wire all the way around. The fishing is limited. They have limits in how far they can fish. And now it's overfished, and their airport was destroyed when Hamas won the elections. Land, sea, water, calorie deficits. Some of the lists, if you look at what's allowed in to Gaza, one year I read jam was not allowed in. Not sure why, what purpose jam could serve other than, with peanut butter, but jam was prohibited. It was on the denied list. And that's not even mentioning the doctrines that the Israeli military adopts. Mowing the lawn or grass, I always forget which one, but it is it's funny because I remember probably 6 months before October, I looked at my husband and I was like, they didn't bomb Gaza yet. And he's like, what? I'm like, well, I mean, it's been like a minute since, the operation, because every year or 2 years without fail, there's uh, bombardment, shooting people at the knees, trying to cripple a generation and kill the resistance. So in that context, like Wissam said, there are discussions to be had about resistance. What does resistance look like? What should it look like? But I believe those conversations have to come from a place of knowledge of what does it currently look like. During the Second Intifada, during the Great March of Return, it was peaceful before 1.3 million live rounds were shot at protesters, peaceful protesters. In the West Bank, there's no freedom of speech or freedom of assembly. And so with those things in mind, it becomes clear, what does occupation look like? It's an occupation of every aspect of these people's lives, including whether they get to live or travel or what they get to eat. It is not a desert that could have bloomed with the right kind of care.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to like the frustration that people in Gaza feel when you're living under occupation. I've visited the West Bank. I haven't visited Gaza. It's very difficult to get there. Um, and the West Bank is sort of like the less bad occupied territory, but it's horrendous there. It is still unbelievable. It seems when I was there, everyone you meet has a story that strikes you. It should be like a global headline, like somebody was raped in prison when they were a kid. This is just like people casually tell these stories. Sorry for the language here, but somebody was abused at a protest. I remember one man telling us that his sister was in her home one day, saw an Israeli bulldozer on the horizon, didn't know where it was going. It was coming to her house. She had less than an hour to pack up all of her things, and that was her home demolished. Israel does that routinely to make room for Israeli settlements, illegal settlements. It's illegal under international law to displace people in occupied land and build settlements there. So this is like everyday stuff, and that's before October 7th. In the year 2023, up until October 7th, Israel killed around 250 Palestinians, including over 30 children. No headlines, no discussion, no context. This doesn't, for the rest of the world, they don't care. For people who now are so outraged about what happened on October 7th, where was the outrage at over 30 kids, Palestinian kids being killed that year? That year. Walaa mentioned the bombings. I mean, I don't know if people are aware, and I say this because, we've been doing this for a long time. I remember 2008. I remember Cast-Led. I remember being out in protests, sitting there watching as Israel was using white phosphorus, dropping white phosphorus in civilian areas. You know what white phosphorus is banned under international law. It's a weapon that's banned because it attaches itself to human skin and burns. It's a weapon that targets human skin. And this was dropped in civilian areas in Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. And I'll come back to that. But that was just 2008. There were around 1,400 Palestinians killed in that, including over 750 civilians and over 300 children. Yeah, that's 1 year. This was in the course of a few weeks. And of course, the Western governments did nothing. Did they impose an arms embargo or sanctions? Right? I mean, look at all the sanctions that are imposed on Russia. Okay, fine. Russia invaded a country. It's committing war crimes. But Israel? Where are the sanctions from Canada and the United States? They're arming this country. They arm this country. They're weapons companies that operate in Calgary who are sending weapons to Israel that it's using in acts of genocide. It's shocking. And that's 2008. There's other ones I could mention. 2014 was another really bad one. Over 2,000 Palestinians killed, again, in the course of a few weeks, including over 500 children. And again, Gaza hasn't even been rebuilt from that. But now, they're attacking Gaza. The UN's saying it's going to take over 80 years to rebuild Gaza. And that's assuming the fighting ends now. But they didn't even rebuild since 2014. They're talking about destruction that's like over a decade old, right? I mean, this is the reality. And on top of that, I mean, let's go back to the historical aspect. I said Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Here's a statistic that a lot of people don't talk about that I think needs to be talked about. Over 2/3 of the population of Gaza are themselves refugees who were expelled from the land that is now the Israeli state. This is why you have all these refugee camps across Gaza. Obviously, there's a lot more now because almost the entire population of Gaza has been displaced, most of them multiple times. But there were refugee camps before, right? How is it that you have a land that is like a part of a Palestinian state? This is the Palestinian territory that will be a part of this great Palestinian state that Israel promised in these negotiations, which is just a carved out piece of land. Palestinians aren't even allowed to travel between the West Bank and Gaza. Over 2/3 of the population are refugees whose actual homes are inside what's now Israel. It just doesn't register with people. This injustice runs deep. And my God, frustration of living under occupation. And then the Palestinians resist. And I mean, are you surprised? Are you surprised that Palestinians react with violence? Does this shock anyone? Shouldn't.
No, when you have no choice, right? Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to add to what Wesam was saying. If we're talking about the media and the truth, it's this idea that you're absolutely right. No one talks about the refugee camps. They're called neighborhoods now, according to the New York Times internal memo. Don't refer to them as refugee camps, and they're Gazans and West Bank, and don't refer to Palestine as a whole state or Palestinians unless absolutely necessary. It's this attempt to erase history that Gaza is mostly comprised of people who were displaced and ethnically cleansed, and this is generations and generations of people who can never return, and are subject to all the conditions that Wesam mentioned.
Yeah, the thought of the word I can only come to right now is the gaslighting in it, right? Because it's not only do you have to feel wrong in terms of fighting, but the reason why you're there to begin with, it's just so compounding, and it's heart-wrenching, to think about how far gone this had to go before people like myself woke up to this, you know what I mean? And quite frankly, why I'm having this conversation is so that we can help others come into this too. So we are going to move into some lighter stuff, although Beau, I want to let you obviously offer some thoughts on that too. And yeah, and if anything else that we haven't covered in terms of rhetoric, that's the bucket of conversation we're in right now, just so you know, as we're trying to address any of the rhetoric. So if there's anything you want to add on in there, please do.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to occupation, right? Like Palestinians are blamed for their own occupation, right? Palestinians are told that, oh, well, the Palestinian Authority, oh, well, Hamas, oh, well, this, that, they govern you, they govern you. I'm like, what power do they have to govern anything? Their water is controlled, their electricity is controlled, their trade is controlled, their fisheries are controlled, their movement is controlled. What state do you have then to govern, right? What does a state do, right? Because they don't have a state. They're a stateless people, right? As it is now, and they're treated as such. But that doesn't mean that their inherent and inalienable human rights ought to be trounced on, right? Freedom of movement is the key one that I can think of that Palestinians are denied on a daily basis, whether it be the West Bank or Gaza, right? It's the most basic thing. Even a stateless person of any other denomination, okay, they can claim refugee status in any other country. They can go anywhere else, right? You can't even leave Gaza, okay, if you wanted to, unless Israel approves it. I don't even know where to begin with the level of like cognitive dissonance when people are talking about anti-Semitism and human rights and this and that and the other. Okay, like when I speak to more mainstream like Jewish organizations, right, they always want to talk about, oh well, they always want to talk about rhetoric as it pertains to denying Palestinians human rights. Oh well, all these queer people who are, advocating for Palestinian rights, if they went to Gaza, if they went to West Bank, okay, they'd be killed, they'd be this, that, the other, they'd be maimed, they'd be this and that, they'd be treated with homophobia. Okay, meanwhile, Israelis are denied the right to marry if they're same-sex relationship. Okay, they're denied employment rights, they're denied housing rights. And the only difference between the United States, which is very low as it relates to queer rights, okay, the only difference between the United States and Israel is that like a few less people die every year from homophobic violence, right? So when we're talking about a group of people who are denied their inalienable human rights on a daily basis, of course you'd be upset. Like if you were told, Jenny, that you couldn't leave your house, okay, without the approval of someone else, you couldn't go to work without the approval of someone else, and even if you were approved to go to work, okay, you had to wait 6 hours in your car to be able to go to work. What kind of life is that? Wouldn't you be upset? Like, wouldn't anyone be upset at that?
Yeah, I heard somebody say, you have a duty to resist. You have a duty to resist. Like you think of, like I'm a parent, the thought of not standing up for your kids in that way of living, what, and especially that it keeps getting worse. You
Not only a
have to.
duty, right? You have a guaranteed right to resist.
Yes, that's right.
You have a
Yeah.
guaranteed right to exist under international law.
And yeah, so you guys have pointed to the hypocrisy of all of this and the expectation that somehow, I'll use an example of like the social media aspect, TikTok is bad because it's Chinese, like there is um bad use on each platform. Like you guys have talked about um uh Meta, filtering Israeli or like, supports for Palestine being filtered out. And it's just the idea that everybody in a country is good and everybody in another country is bad. Like, come on, like we know that that is not a true thing, and so it's just the way we're supposed to just in one area this is true and in this area it's not. It's becoming just so impossible to be behind. You help me remember, Beau. Ronnie Lee, who presented a couple weeks ago, talked about this, and you can probably expand on this more, but Wesam passed this on to me. So there's a group of Israeli and Palestinian women that had a statement recently. The group said, we cannot close our eyes to the shocking number of men, women, and children who are victims of occupation and the war in Gaza. While the Israeli public knows the names and faces of the murdered, the killed, and the dead, and the kidnapped on the Israeli side, inconceivably, tens of thousands of murdered and dead, 1.5 million displaced persons in Gaza, and the Israeli starvation policy did not reach public discourse. Many Israelis believe that there are no innocent people in Gaza. We women of the feminist space, Palestinian and Jewish women living in Israel, seek to awaken the Israeli public to the destruction that is taking place in our name. So there's more, and I'll share this as I share this this conversation. But did you want to add anything to that, Beau? Like around this, to me, I think there was a big
Yeah.
gathering as well. Please, yeah.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people like really fail to realize, okay, Israelis have the luxury, and I never thought I would ever say this in my life, the luxury of a shiva, the luxury of a funeral, the luxury of being able to mourn your dead. Not one single Palestinian since October 7th has been able to mourn their dead. I'll leave it at that. There's thousands of babies and women, and like let's just talk about the fact that like the numbers are given to these folks, and even though we've lost the capacity to count how many people have been killed, Okay. It is still such the fact that I see commentators on either side of the aisle, moderate as they may be, that I will leave that to interpretation. But the numbers are questioned such that, oh, we don't know how many of those were militants. Okay, well, 2/3 of them, 3/4 of them, okay, are women and children. 75% of them are women and children. How many of those women and babies are taking up arms? Let's just be real, okay? If you knew a single goddamn thing, you'd know that it's highly unlikely, statistically unlikely. And in fact, against a lot of people's religious practices, if your whole shtick is about being against Muslims, for women and babies to take up arms. So these innocent civilians, right? Even if it was 25,000 instead of 37,000, okay? I don't care if you're just like not going to count the men in that equation. Okay, fine. Not a single innocent man exists. As a transgender man, I think, I'm sympathetic to the fact that that is entirely ridiculous. But
Yeah,
here we
that's
are.
actually something new that's come into my view too, is why do we always put it that way, that it's women and children? And I'm like, please, I obviously I'm a woman and I have
It's it,
children, but what about the men that are being like, and it
it's
and
because it's easier to refute
It's
because
the
right.
propaganda is
demonization.
so deep. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
the demonization of Arab and Muslim men, and I think Israel is riding the wave of Islamophobia following 9/11 really, really hard right now. And that's why the men, like, as a daughter and a sister, I have four brothers and a wife and a mother to sons. I'm so glad you brought that up, Beau and Jenny, because it's not talked about. These men are men, like good, decent, honorable men who want to provide for their families and love them and watch them grow, and yet they're written off as the militant part of it. And also their stories, like for example, I'm sure you guys heard about the detention center in Gaza. I don't know how to pronounce it. Timen. I'm butchering it. But where they were taking the men and the boys of Gaza to interrogate them. And if I tell you, like, Abu Ghraib, like all over again, this dehumanization and demonization of brown men. It is such a huge injustice that's not talked about enough. That
What was
militants
the
as
term you just used there? Sorry,
Abu Ghraib.
yeah.
It's the prison in Iraq in
Oh, I see.
2004, Abu
I see.
Ghraib. I don't know how to, like, the
No,
Most
thank you.
most like Anglo folks would know it as like Abu Ghraib.
Abu Ghraib. Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
Beau. I appreciate that. It was, yeah, the whole. I think they just finished the trials for those soldiers that were, like, what they did was horrific. Was absolutely, like, in this dehumanization of Arabs and Muslims. This is where it stems from. When you have people on Israeli TV, if you ever tune in, and they're like, "I will not live across the border from 30,000 rapists." It's like, what? Like, we're just broadly putting it out there. And going back to anti-Semitism, actually, if you don't mind, I wanted to bring one point up. This is not contingent upon, like, Zionism colonizing Palestine, right? Or them being Jewish. Any colonizer would be the problem, right? This is not, or like, there's no religious roots here to make it anti-Semitic. And I was sharing this recently with somebody. I grew up here, and I remember, like, in school, when, like, we talk about Palestine and the Holocaust in Israel, I'd get like this uncomfortable feeling, like, oh my, like, people like looking at me like, am I is this real? Is this, like, there's actually something here? And then when I had the opportunity to live in Syria, to see how peacefully everybody coexisted, like, the Jewish neighborhoods and the Christian neighborhoods and the church bells and the adhan going off, and it's like, oh, I actually believed some of that garbage myself, that somehow there's something inherently there between us. So it was just an awakening, I'd say. And I think Beau touched on the propaganda, right? And I think that's where a lot of people are awakening from so many of these myths, like Israel wants peace, but there's no partner to be had. This is ancient, this is um, anti-Semitic, and so on and so forth. All of these claims really just boil down to this cover to continue the occupation, continue evicting Palestinians off their land in the West Bank, and continue Israeli settlement.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, Willa, was, when I say that I don't want to condemn all people who identify as Zionists, although I categorically and philosophically disagree with Zionism, right? Is that a lot of people are taught to cling to this identity, right? Rather than evaluate the facts on the ground. Evaluate the fact that you're taking away someone else's human right in order to bolster this idea and bolster this political philosophy and this ideology, rather than look for a world and work towards a world where everyone has the same rights and everyone can coexist, right? And if you want to bring it to a Jewish perspective, why are you doing God's work for him? Right?
Who
In
died
many
and made
religions,
you, right?
that's something that we would call blasphemy.
Right. That's the interesting thing, right? It even goes against any religion, like love thy neighbor. All of these things the principles that we could supposedly can rely on in any religion, those common threads that are somehow just non-existent when it comes to these.
There are so many excerpts from like Torah scrolls that I could give you, and like many of which like actually pertain to like not destroying trees when you're occupying an area. Like there's actually passages against the ecocide that's happening in Israel Palestine, right? There's
Well,
just
and that's
so many things that just like are completely against like religious tenet that have nothing to do with like the state, right? But there's so many other things that you should know very well that when you get that final test, you're going to fail.
right. Well, and this is so to me the story is yet to be written. So I think this is the okay. So unless there's more rhetoric stuff to talk about, and I'm happy to do that. And I also see it's 8 o'clock. I hope you guys don't have a hard stop. But I did want to talk about the positive. So we now have an opportunity, being that we have sorry, I'm not going to do a good job of saying it, but I'm going to tee it up and you guys can say it better than me, which is we have countries like Ireland and Spain, and obviously South Africa and Colombia that have said Palestine has the right to exist. And like Wesam, you have said, and I can see the parallels. We've talked about the parallels to the indigenous people here in Canada. So this is a massive opportunity. Back to your point, Beau, about us, a world of equity. We get to write this future. And that's what I was saying to Wesam before we started. You guys are the leaders of this. Like it's become very apparent to me that whoever is, what's the expression, who feels that that they want to change the world are the ones that do change the world. And that's quite frankly what's happening in this, right? Is that you guys are having the conversation. So I'm going to stop talking, but can you please talk about the conversations that you're having around what does truth and reconciliation look like from a Palestinian perspective?
I mean, I'll say it's very difficult to talk about positives in the context of what's going on. I think right now, top priority is everyone who can needs to do everything within their power at least for people in Canada, to compel the Canadian government to stop supporting this genocide. There need to be certainly bare minimum an arms embargo on Israel from Canada. The fact that Canadian-made weapon systems and technologies could be being used in those massacres we're seeing that are leaving headless babies and leaving mass graves in front of hospitals and carpet bombing refugee camps, that needs to be stopped. And, people need to get involved in that. I'd say it needs to go a lot further. It needs to be sanctions as well. Full sanctions from the Canadian government until Israel complies with international law and stops occupation and apartheid against the Palestinian people. Like I hear what you're saying. We want to talk about what this means for the world as well, and where we go from this, and what this tells us about colonialism. And one thing we've been doing in Calgary, we've been working very closely and learning also from our indigenous allies here. And it's been quite eye opening, I think, for a lot of people who have maybe been involved in the Palestinian cause for a long time, but haven't really paid much attention to the way things are going here in Canada. I think people might be very surprised to hear how similar the situation is for indigenous people in this country. I mean, it's not the case that, like, Canada is a country that has come to terms with its colonial history. Its colonial history is ongoing. I mean, just recently we saw up in northern Alberta the Woodland Cree Nation, fighting to defend their land. I mean, how is that something that's still going on? We all know about the plight of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls in Two Spirit, and also boys and men. Yeah, that's still ongoing. The genocide is actually ongoing against people here. Indigenous people in these communities. And we I mentioned that, like, I remember 2008 and Cast Lead and these past massacres from Israel. And at the time, I have to say, like, it felt like, Cast Lead in particular, and then the one that came after, it just felt like it could never get worse than this. This is the worst thing we're ever going to see. And now I'm feeling like this is the worst thing we're ever going to see. And God forbid where things could go if we don't actually take the action now. And that's the thing that I think is so frustrating to people that have been involved in this cause for a long time, is that we've seen these outrageous massacres in 2008 and 2014, and just constant daily degradation and injustice of occupation, and just been crying out for change here, for somebody to take action, for someone to see this and say, this cannot go on. And I think, the same call is being made, but I think also, like, people this time around, it feels like, you were telling me earlier, Jenny, about would you call it the
Poly crisis.
poly
So
crisis?
we're in a social, environmental, and economic crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it does really feel like everything's falling apart at the same time, right? Like, between the cost of living and, student debt and militarization and, the increasing wars around the world, and just everything feels like it's really degrading. And it is actually. And, this is a point, I think, of reflection where we have to look at what is this world that we live in and how is it structured. And we start right here. Start right here in Canada. If it means using what's happening in Gaza as a rallying cry to get people to start making these sort of big changes that need to be made. I mean, how is it? How is it? I mean, this stuff is relevant to Palestine too. I mean, we have so many people who are terrified of standing up for Gaza because they're worried about what it's going to mean for them, what's going to mean for their careers, what's going to mean for their reputation. I saw today there was a nurse in New York who won an award from her hospital for her service and good work. And during her award speech, called what's happening in Gaza a genocide and called out the murder of healthcare workers there. And the next day she was fired. I mean, how, and people are terrified. Hey, losing your job is not an okay thing in this society. That's as close to a death sentence as it gets for some people. If you can't, especially if your reputation is tarnished, you're fired for accusations of anti-Semitism because you've criticized Israel. People are terrified. We talk to people every day who tell us, we wish we could do more. We wish we could come out, but we're terrified of the repercussions. We have so much to say and we're terrified. So, like, this is a question of our society too. How many people in this society are struggling? And it is predominantly going to be Indigenous folks and refugees and people of color, not exclusively, but these are the questions that we have to start asking, and they're relevant to Gaza. Gaza, in a sense, and Palestinians are saying this, and non-Palestinians are saying this, Gaza is, in a sense, like freeing the world right now. They're freeing themselves, and the Palestinian people are in a struggle for, like, their very lives right now. But at the same time, I'm optimistic that out of this, we are going to see a liberated Palestinian state. But it's not just Palestine. Right, this is exposing the structures of the entire world that have lined up behind a genocide to support a genocide at a time when they can't even feed their own populations or house their own populations. I mean, that's shocking. And
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. There's just so much that goes together, like going after gas fields in Gaza. We cannot drill more gas. Like, even if you leave the human part out of it for a second. No, we can't do that. Even to be, like you said, 80 years to rebuild a community. Where are these materials coming from? Like, this is none of this makes any sense. And like you said, it's happening to us here too, where we, I was thinking, and I know this is not the same, please, here, I'm not equating these two, but there's similarities to this idea of Alberta's calling. So there's this, the provincial government is inviting other people from the rest of the country, and they're giving them $5,000 in tax credits to move here. Nobody's being offered it, so they're being given a job. They're moving here for a job, and they're getting a tax benefit to come here. Is that not similar in the sense of what's happening at a totally different scale, please, here, but it's similar in that there's additional potential occupation being promoted and a degradation of what people can afford. So what's happened in Calgary specifically is house prices have come up because people are coming from more expensive provinces that are driving up our rental things. And then the rhetoric we hear here is Trudeau is letting in immigrants. What? No, these are Canadians. So there's so much to that. Sorry, I can see, Beau, you want to weigh in. Go ahead.
I do just want to ask, like, Jenny, I'm assuming you mean that these jobs are in oil and gas, right?
Well, this is just it. It's to promote
Right.
we need workers to be doing development, right? So generally speaking, it is for oil and gas. Yeah.
When the province of Alberta has just like kneecapped all green development of natural resources in this province and is subsequently doing that, yeah, the Alberta government is the one driving up housing right here. And the fact that they've never had a rental cap, they've never had any sort of like consumer protections as it relates to utilities and insurance and XYZ, like even grocery costs. Okay. Like there are consumer protections that could be put in place for every single Canadian, immigrant or not. Right, that our federal government and our provincial government, and primarily in this case, our provincial government refuses to put in place. And in fact, they removed the insurance cap, they removed the utility cap, and they've never put in a rental cap.
We have an irregulated energy market where and it hurts the poorest people. There's no protection of people that if you don't have a good credit rating, you get the worst rate.
Yeah, and it is true also that, like, yes, the federal government lets in about 225,000, between 225,000, 250,000 new immigrants every year, right? But let's not talk about that. That's not the problem. The problem is that our government cannot provide for its citizenry, period. It doesn't matter who's coming in and who's coming out. It really does not matter, because every time someone talks about 225,000, 250,000 people coming in every year, they don't say how many people are leaving every year.
That's
I
right.
can tell you right now, I would love to live in Denmark, baby. I don't mind if there's a 60% tax rate. I'm just like, oh, I love what you've done with the place. Oh, free education. Oh, free healthcare. Oh, if I have dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever medical condition, I'll be taken care of for the rest of my life. Love that. Love that. Okay. That is not the same case in Canada, where my grandmother died in her own filth, okay, of dementia, because this country does not provide for its citizens in a meaningful way, and instead treats corporations as though they ought to have more rights than the average human being. We should have nationalized the oil sands in the 80s under Trudeau Sr. when he proposed it, but Alberta's a bunch of piss babies, and so we didn't do that.
Yeah, we supported the corporations instead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll go to Denmark, Beau. Let's go to Denmark. Let's go live a good life. No, 100%. I just want to tie in what you're saying with what Wesam said earlier, that Gaza is really, really just ripped the veneer off that what was left of us thinking like, that these structures were had some remnants of justice in them, or equality, or were progressive, or were, people centered. And the reality is that all of these systems are what is oppressing us here and what is oppressing us there. I mean, I'm sure you guys heard that Congress just removed the temporary block that they put on the $18 billion arms sale to Israel for the F-15 fighter jets. Is that what they're called? And when you see that in the context of the UN also declaring crimes against humanity and a massacre of nearly 400 people and starvation, and the ICJ and the ICC, you see that it's the people, like the actual people, they don't really matter in these systems. We have systems set up that continue to feed the wealthy and to promote these corporations on the backs of people. And this can be said about, what's happening in the Congo with the genocide and the cobalt mines, where they're employing children to save money, so they can make batteries so that we can continue to purchase and give these people more money than they already have. So I think when you put, if we're going back to Palestine and Israel, if you put that into it, it really starts to make sense that this area, specifically Palestine, Gaza, it has always been a hotspot for trade, for routes. It has been a contested area of land. And you see that this is about controlling. America is supporting Israel, not, because they, I don't know, feel bad or they have that guilt, and Europe has that guilt. And that's why all of this, sorry to sound so pessimistic, but all this statehood recognition, it rings really empty to me. I mean, South Africa, 100%. I was like, yes, South Africa, you got us. As for like the European Union, it doesn't really mean much when you see the benefit that it has for them. And also that this idea of a two-state solution is, I think, inherently unjust given the structure of Palestine right now, or what remains of it. And the idea that I don't know if going back to Zionism's early roots, the idea that the Iron Wall and that Palestinian resistance, or a Palestinian existence within the boundaries of what is seen as Israel, is not acceptable. So I see this as just delaying a problem rather than giving justice to people that need it. And I think that when we all fight these fights together against what's happening in the Congo, against, imperialism, colonialism, what's happening here, like Wesam mentioned, to our indigenous brothers and sisters, and we learn from our elders, we see that this is all interconnected. Going back to that systems thing that I mentioned, the systems that oppress me are the same systems that oppress Beau and Wesam and you and all of us.
But if I could just add to that, like what reconciliation looks like in regards to Palestine and all world conflicts, really, honestly, it's removing permanent member status at the UN Security Council, removing the veto power from US and China and Russia. Okay, remove it. There should be no veto. Okay, if it's democracy, it's democracy. Let's talk about that, because also, like, when as it relates to Palestinians, okay, you want Israel to have an Iron Dome funded by the United States. Okay, why doesn't Palestine have an Iron Dome? Why can't they have an Iron Dome? Because if they had an Iron Dome, then I'm sure they'd feel a lot more secure, and then maybe there'd be less violence, because they wouldn't have bombs dropping on their civilians all the time. I think that's completely ridiculous. The double standard that's applied to Palestinians versus Israelis, because they're in cahoots with the Western imperial powers. If we remove the fact that the imperial powers in this global system, rules-based system, okay, remove that veto power, remove that, and make it into a multipolar system. We're moving from a unipolar moment to a multipolar moment, and it is some growing pains right now, but I see some of that in the works. However, I also see countries like Switzerland. who have been historically neutral. Okay, say that, oh well, between Russia and Ukraine, oh we gotta support Ukraine, we gotta support Ukraine. Okay, well, as it relates to Russia and Ukraine, and like you were saying, well, is that many of these conflicts relate to resource extraction, right? Ukraine has the largest percentage of black soil concentration in the world. You can't tell me that Europe or NATO aren't vying for that type of trade resource in the region. Let's not talk about the military like capacity or the advantage that it would provide for the US and its allies in that region if Ukraine were just handed over to Russia. I don't know if you've seen Russia's proposal for negotiations. That's just a starting point. Like, if I want to be giving the benefit of the doubt on both sides, let's just be their starting point is, we want basically all the territories that we've claimed throughout this conflict, and we want to keep the territories that we've claimed, since before 2014. And Ukraine just gets a small parcel of land, and they can figure out whatever, but they have to remain neutral. They can't join NATO. They can't do this. They can't do that. Right? Where on the other side, they're like, yes, join NATO. Yes, fight this forever war against Russia for us. It's a Cold War. So if we're talking about truth and reconciliation, let's tell the truth about why it is that any of these people are involved in any of these conflicts to begin with, be it Ukraine, be it Israel, be it, be it the Congo, be it Yemen on the Red Sea, right? Like, why is it that the United States is throwing itself in the middle of the Red Sea right now, right? Why is it? It's to protect their trade routes. It's to protect their economic interests, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Go ahead.
oh,
Yeah.
no, I was just going to say it's a follow the money trail, right? Usually follow the money and you will have your answers.
Yeah, and to Beau's point, it's that to me, it's now even the resource itself. Like, it used to be follow the money, and now you can see, like, the Suez Canal gets plugged, and we're talking about a new trade route. And where do we do that? Okay, let's do it through Gaza. Like, there's so much that like I said, it doesn't even seem like they're trying to do this behind closed doors anymore. It's just so out in the open. So, thank you, Wissam, for saying, and I'm going to reiterate what you said, which is we do need this country to do a complete arms embargo for Israel and sanctions, just like what you're describing they're doing to Russia. Like, throughout this, I'm like, how is this not different? Like, it's no different. And to your point about the veto, that Russia was able to veto this conflict, and now the US is vetoing this. Like, no, the problem is it's colonialism. And that's why, I'm not stepping over what is needed. Please hear, I know we're not, I'm an extreme optimism in the face of where I shouldn't be. So please know that's my lens. But the reality is, back to your point, we can't continue this way. These structures are not serving any of us, and not even the people that are trying to rule this in this way. Because at the end of the day, I'm a geoscientist. We have to honor what the earth is possible of delivering. And to your point, Walla, it's the exploitation of the resources and then the people to do the exploitation. Both of those things need to stop. And that's where, like, to me, the beauty and the optimism is at the root of, is I think there's more and more of us becoming aware of that. So when I talk about the optimism piece, I'm speaking more of, we are realizing that it is up to us and that we have to basically write this future ourselves.
Thank you for pointing that out, Jenny. I think given what is happening and what is continuing to happen, and like Wissam said, every day you wake up and you're like, oh my God, it can't get worse than this. And then the next and the next and the next. It's been a lot of secondhand trauma. So I can't imagine what is happening on the ground to people who, like Beau mentioned, haven't even been afforded the luxury of grieving, or they're just, it's survival right now. But I think you're right, because, and I think Wissam, you can speak to this. It is a very different climate right now that we're advocating in compared to even 4 years ago. 2014, 2008, 2010, 6. I can go back in time to when I would turn on, well, my dad would put Al Jazeera for us and then put, like CBC or CNN, and it was like two different stories. You'd hear about like a child being shot, and then it was a terrorist who was eliminated. And we see this, and this is social media, and it's opening up people's eyes. And this generation is kind of cool, actually. This one that's coming up, this woke generation that's like, no, I'm not gonna like take what you say at face value, right? I love it. I love this constant challenging of what we're told, because so much of what we were told, it's not the truth. I mean, I'm still in shock that I was in grade 3 here when the last residential school was still operating. And I wasn't taught that in school. I was taught about, I think, teepees and igloos and canoes, and none of the real stuff that was actually still happening. I think, yes, you're right. The people, and this is why we always say at the rallies, the people united will never be defeated. I think this is where we build these movements, is person to person, conversation to conversation, dispelling those myths and reclaiming the narrative for all of us.
Beautifully said. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so yeah, we've gone way over time. I really appreciate you guys doing this. I want to make sure, let's take some, just maybe a round of takeaways, if you don't mind. So I'm just going to offer, yeah, I totally agree. It's about conversation. It's about doing this, more of this. I would be happy to host you guys later on again this year, once we have a bit more. Oh man, I would love to say, like you said, Wesam, that it's, something positive, something that we can look at that's actually meaningful. But, we have this election coming, and we haven't even talked about that and the implications that this awakening is happening on the left, as one who is, terrified of a US under someone who doesn't want to have any climate policy whatsoever. I know now that these are too connected to feel hopeful on either side of the aisle right now. To me, the only move is peace, before November. So let's hope for that. Well, I mean, let's work towards that. As you said, Wesam, we have to make these calls. We have to ask for these things. But these conversations, and also I just wanted to offer, I did a survey recently that was talking about how did I end up there? How did I end up at the rally? It was a really good survey from I think it was in Scotland. Somebody sent to me, and so I knew Ronnie Lee, and so that was the thing that brought me there. So I just, for anybody that listens to this, it's a very welcoming space. It's a very, I had one of the first times I was there was a vet. I'm sure you guys know him. He's been a regular, and I stood beside him and I said, this is a no-brainer, right? And he's like, no brainer. Like, I've been everywhere, and this is a no-brainer. So I think it's good to feel that you're a part of standing up for the innocent, And so I hope people feel that it is going to take more people like me. I heard we need more Karens. So I'm doing my best to represent and bring more Karens to the table. So I'm hoping that this conversation will do just that.
Yeah, I think that like the thing that folks really need to remember is like contextualizing all of these global policies, these meetings at the UN, and taking in like diverse sources of information, right? So, now there's like apps that can help you discern like what political leaning or what bias a news source has. Even if you just subscribe for like 1 month and take note of each of these organizations, there's tons of lists as well that you can get for free that show you what news source and what biases that they have, so you can think critically about the information that you're taking in, right? And I'm so happy for that now. But I really enjoy a YouTube channel actually for like for myself, called Neutrality Studies, and it speaks about of course, the lens is that it prizes neutrality, in global and international policy. However, it also criticizes when folks are just blatantly breaking international law, like be it the US, be it Brazil, be it, Guatemala, whatever, doesn't matter. Like Israel, whatever, Saudi Arabia, you got it. But like you're getting a lens that is willing to be critical of all of these places without essentializing the people, without essentializing the message in such a way that they get a 10-second clip. Okay. The thing I love about social media, the thing I love about, especially long form content on social media, is that they really get, to be able to explore the issue in such a way that, like, in many ways is not reliant on ad revenue, right? In many ways, a lot of these people providing this sort of content, even like Norm Finkelstein and a bunch of other folks, like they're able to provide this content because that's not their full-time job. That's not their full-time job. They're not there to sell you, Manscaped or whatever the hell, you know. They're there to deliver a message and talk about the topic because they're passionate about it and they want to discuss it. And I would invite any person, any Jewish person who sees this and maybe is uncomfortable with people, especially in the pro-Palestinian movement, especially in the anti-war movement, being critical of Zionism or saying that they're anti-Zionist when, we're in a climate where even real anti-Semites, right? Real people who are anti-Semitic are anti-Zionist. Okay. I don't like the misnomer. I don't like that the dichotomy of Zionist versus anti-Zionist is being discussed in a way that is not sensitive, right, in many ways to Jewish people, but that's Jewish people's work to do. So if you want to have a discussion about Zionism with me, a Jewish person who would love to have that conversation, okay, please, please, please reach out to IJV Calgary. I would love to have that conversation with you. I would love to discuss the real issues here rather than, and even give you a safe place to talk about your feelings, right? Because I don't think that that's the place where people, Palestinian folks and Arab folks and Muslim folks and other folks who have family who have just been like slaughtered, en masse, okay, are in a place to discuss with you. So please, please reach out to me and IJV Calgary. It's IJV Calgary on Instagram. If you want to start having that conversation, if you're curious about what it means, to talk about, even the idea of Zionism and maybe start to think about what the implications are for the world around you, please reach out to me. I'll leave it at that.
On the point about November and the elections, people are going to have different views about this. I'm not of the opinion that everything is going to revolve around that election. And I mean, uh, as far as I'm concerned, a plague on both their houses. And that goes for some of the Canadian parties too. And I realize that comes from a position of a bit of privilege, because I'm sure if you're in the United States and you're like a woman or if you're LGBT, you may have some strong feelings about, it may actually make a tangible difference in your life. On the other hand, I mean, we've had President Biden. I didn't see him swoop in to save the day when the Supreme Court overturned the abortion protections in the United States. I haven't seen him coming in. What I have seen him doing is supporting a genocide. And actually, Palestinians and Arabs feel quite strongly right now that maybe there's something wrong with the situation where you feel that you have to tell people to vote for Biden, hold their nose and vote for Biden. And I remember seeing, I don't know if people have seen this horrendous meme with the trolley. You guys know the trolley question, where it's like there's one person on a track and then there's 5 people and the trolley's going this way. And they do all kinds of memes about it. And there's one that has been going around where it's like, on the one side, if you vote for Biden, Palestinian person is on the track. Whereas if you vote for Trump, there's the Palestinian person and LGBT and women's rights and environmental rights. But, okay, all right. Again, I don't see Biden jumping in on any of these things. But more importantly than that, I think we need to stop taking advice from people who can't imagine a world where Arabs aren't being slaughtered. I think that is something we need to start taking seriously. Yeah. Like I'm not interested in these lesser evil arguments anymore. And I don't think a lot of people are, and especially young people. I totally agree with what Walaa said about the young activists and the students we're seeing taking up this battle around encampments all around, the world. And here in Calgary, who endured an enormous amount of police violence and a lot of lies from the Calgary police chief about what happened on that night. I'll add. But these people are not accepting the old way anymore. They also are coming in a context where their futures are totally in jeopardy. A lot of them are studying programs. They don't know if they're going to have careers after that, if there's going to be jobs, right? And these people have tasted struggle. They're a young generation that's tasted struggle now and seen the reality. They're watching on TikTok and on social media images of children and civilians being picked out of the rubble while their governments justify it, right? So these people are not going to accept the old way anymore, nor should they, nor should they, and it's going to mean that all of us are going to have to start looking at the world and living in a different way. We talked a bit about refugees and a bit about the exploitation of the rest of the world. This is not academic, abstract stuff. I mean, the world we're living in is built. It is the world that came out of colonialism. It is the world that came out of the exploitation of the rest of the world and continues to be maintained through that exploitation. A lot of people go into this refugee debate as if all of these issues are going to be explained by oh, we need to get the refugees out of here, that'll solve the housing crisis, that'll solve the economy. Well, I mean, first of all, yeah, good luck with that. All right. It's not like the government here is just waiting, if not for these immigrants, we'd be able to extend housing to people. And I mean, like what they really want to do is even the anti-immigrant people, like the Trumps, they're not doing this because they're patriots. They care about protecting working people. They're doing it because they want you to go and do those crap jobs that immigrants are coming in and doing. You're against immigration. Do you want to go? Do you want to go and work on minimum wage for these crap jobs that immigrants are coming from to work here? But you know what? Well, and I don't mean to mischaracterize everyone as being sort of, I don't want to fall into this rhetoric of, they're not sending their best or whatever. But the reality is, there's also a lot of people who are coming here that, are coming here because actually you wonder why are people coming from India to work in, drive-throughs in Canada? There are people who do that. Why? Because the life they're coming from is worse than the life of a minimum wage worker in this country, right? This is also the world that we're looking at, right? And, all of us, every one of
As
us.
as
Mm,
doctors sometimes,
yep.
to come
Yeah,
from
yeah.
another country as a doctor and drive a taxi, for example, like the years that we've looked at that and been, "Oh, okay."
Any one of us can walk into a mall or department store and just find a plethora of goods that you can buy that are, for the most part, made with slave labor or sweatshop labor or child labor. And we all know it. We all know it's happening, and no one bats an eye at it. Right. So, I mean, that kind of stuff is actually going to have to change. This is a part of this entire situation. And the structures of oppression exist for indigenous people in this country. They exist for people of color in this country. They exist for working class people in this country and all around the rest of the world, too. And all around the rest of the world, it exists like that. Yeah. And these structures are coming toppling down and people are starting to see it. And that shouldn't be of concern to people, frankly. I'll just conclude with this. Jenny, we were talking before we went live that you were talking about apocalypse and how the etymology of it actually refers to what is it, uncovering or lifting a veil.
Lifting of the veil, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are entering an apocalyptic era. And I don't mean that in a negative way. The world that we've known is coming to an end. And if you're one of the hundreds of millions of people who has lived for years in poverty or in homelessness or in hunger, or one of the millions of Palestinians that has been living under occupation for 75 years, good riddance. Enough with this world. Let's have something else.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Please, Wala, if you can finish this off, love it.
Yes, I just want to say I agree with Wissam 100%. Good riddance. I love what both Beau and Wissam said. Beau touched on, having those hard conversations. I think those are essential for our growth. We shouldn't let it hold us back that, we feel we don't know or we're hesitant or this is a taboo topic. I think on the contrary, the more that we have those honest, I don't know, or I believe this, or can you tell me about this? The more we can grow and strengthen ourselves. And like Wissam said, we've been doing some great work with intersectionality, different communities here, the indigenous community, the pro-Palestinian, the independent Jewish voices. And it's amazing work to see. As for what Wissam said, I think with that, I love that apocalypse being the veil lifted. I think it's a critical time for us all to ask ourselves what, like, this is our corner of the world. What can we do to make it better? Like, we are past this being a critical point in time. I mean, like global warming, it is upon us, you know, climate change, the environment, the toxins, everything. It is all coming and rushing to um, ahead. We need to ask ourselves, how can we take an action? And don't for a second belittle what you can do as an individual. And this is what I love to see. Like, if there's a point of optimism here, it's exactly that, is that every person who stands up and says, you know, I'm going to boycott this, or I'm going to join this encampment, or go to this protest, that is how you build movements. It's by people, individuals coming together and risking things. You're absolutely right. I mean, we just saw right now with the graduations how many university students had their degrees withheld. That's 4 or 5 years of a lot of money and a lot of effort. So the consequences are real, but I really think that being silent, those consequences are much worse. When it comes to Palestine in specifically, although, like we said, it is part of this larger picture that we really need to be critical of and act upon. I think the core of it is the Palestinian voice, their own desires and their own freedoms and dignities that they've been robbed of for so long. Unless there is self-determination and the ability for them to determine their future, it's always been that they are on the side suffering while world leaders discuss their situation about, are we going to recognize a state? Are we going to consider these settlements illegal? Are we going to? They need to be at the forefront, leading the conversation on what their future looks like. This is their life. And I believe that 75 years of being silenced it's more than, it's egregious enough as it is, that they should be brought to the forefront of the conversation now. And that is listening even again to the hard points that maybe not everybody wants to hear. The PA, no, I'm like, if you want to hear it from the Palestinians, that they are oppressing their own people, they need to go forward and say, this is what it looks like for us. This is justice and equality.
You guys have outdone my expectations. Thank you so much. You know, if there's anything I see is that you guys are the real deal. You know, you guys have been doing this work for over a decade. I feel all of this, like with my kids, my son, you know, one thing I just want to offer, he said, why do we learn social studies as if it's over? Like, why do I learn about the Second World War as if it's done? And it was like, wow, you know, like, and the other day we were talking about something personal and he said, oh, so they still think like an individual, like for individualism. And I went, wow, like you're right. Our kids are getting it, you know, like they're learning it and it's coming. And I think to me, it's about being ready for when it falls apart, this veil, when this lifts entirely, that we be ready with how we want that to be and that community. And I think, you know, the antidote to all of this is, you know, capitalism doesn't want us to care and it doesn't want us to be in community. So I think if we just honor those two things, that's where, and it's happened. You guys talked about it with social media. They wanted us all to have phones to support capitalism. Well, what did that do? That made us all care about each other, right? So it's cannibalizing itself. And so I think we just need to be ready with those solutions. And that's why I'm just so grateful to be a part of this community. Okay, we've ran super long. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much, guys. I'm sure we'll have a chance to do this again. Thank you. Okay, have a great night. I'll sign us off now. Take care.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.